The postcard route. The iron box sat on the sheriff's desk, its lock shattered, its contents arrayed like evidence at a murder scene. Inside, a ledger with names and prices. Children priced like cattle. At the bottom of the last page, in the crisp blue ink of a notary's seal, was the signature that would unravel 20 years of small-town corruption. Sheriff Elias Thorne's own name. 13 hours earlier, Helen's gloved hand had gripped the rusty garden shears. The Vermont cold bit through her jacket as she worked the blades through the tangle of ivy. Hairy vines, brittle with age, snicked apart one by one. Her breath emerged in thin white clouds. The shears made a metallic rhythm. Snick, 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 each cut precise, each breath audible in the gray morning silence. The wooden mailbox post had been hidden for so long that the vines had nearly claimed it entirely. Helen had come to clear out the Miller property after old Nathaniel's passing, a neighbor she barely knew, remembered mostly for his silence and his habit of watching the road. The county had asked her, as the nearest living relative he'd named in his will, to handle it. 15 minutes of work, she'd thought. Clear out the mailbox, file whatever bills were inside, move on with her week. The final layer of ivy peeled back. What emerged was corroded brass, a U.S. mailbox listing slightly on its post, the flag welded shut. A heavy padlock held the door sealed, its keyhole clogged with silt. Helen ran her index finger across the keyhole, clearing away decades of fine dust that fell in a small gray cloud. The lock's teeth were worn smooth. She retrieved the hammer and screwdriver from her truck. The first strike made a sharp crack that echoed across the empty farmstead. The padlock's hasp sheared clean. Metal fragments tumbled into the dead grass below. The mailbox door groaned open on hinges that had long since given up on quiet operation, revealing interior shadows so deep they seemed to absorb the gray morning light. Inside, a black metal security box, roughly the size of a shoebox, wrapped in grease-stained brown paper. Helen reached in. Her fingers trembled slightly as the cold metal made contact with her skin. She pulled the box free, heavier than she'd expected. The paper crinkled as she peeled it back, revealing marker-scrawled letters, "For the postal inspector." The lid opened smoothly. Inside lay a Leica M3 vintage camera, its chrome lens dulled with age, and beneath it, a stack of manila envelopes, each labeled with alphanumeric codes: TX99B, VT10A, MA04C, others arranged in precise order. The codes meant nothing to her, yet. She carried the box to her truck and drove home through the gray morning, rain beginning to fall in tentative drops, as if the sky itself was uncertain about committing to the day. By early afternoon, Helen sat at her circular oak table with the envelopes spread before her like a solitaire game with no winning hand. The rain had intensified, pelting the kitchen window with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. She used a sterling silver magnifying glass, inherited from her mother, one of the few beautiful things she owned, to examine the first document. Names of teenagers, next to each name. A figure in thousands of dollars. Market value, the document said, in bureaucratic lettering. She moved to the next envelope. The document inside was a notarized transit permit. Her magnifying glass found the signature at the bottom. Sheriff Elias Thorne. The blue ink seal was crisp, fresh-looking despite what should have been 20 years of aging. Helen's hand moved toward her cordless phone on instinct. She punched in the number for the state police. The phone rang. Once. Twice. Then, a sound that turned her blood cold. A faint, mechanical click. The sound of an extension being picked up in another room of her own house. She hung up immediately. The hallway behind the kitchen was empty. But on the linoleum by the mudroom door, a muddy footprint was still wet and glistening. Helen's breath came in short gasps. Someone had been inside her house. Someone was still here. She had maybe 30 seconds to move. The back window exploded. Glass shards erupted across the kitchen floor like diamonds, refracting light even as they fell. A gloved hand crashed through the remaining frame, black leather and heavy canvas. Helen screamed, a sound that surprised her with its rawness, and dove for the metal box on the table. The intruder lunged, his hooded silhouette filling the window frame. Helen swung the metal box with both hands, all the rage and terror of the past 5 minutes channeled into her arms. The corner connected with his temple. The impact, a dull, wet thud, reverberated up through her shoulders. He stumbled back. For a moment, Helen thought he might retreat. Instead, he grabbed her hair. His grip was powerful, yanking her head down toward the counter with brutal efficiency. Helen's neck twisted. She reached blindly behind her, fingers scrabbling across the counter's surface until they found the wooden rolling pin. She brought it down with everything she had. The wood cracked against his wrist. His grip loosened. She kicked him in the groin. He doubled forward, and Helen shoved him through the open door into the rain-soaked yard. She slammed the heavy oak door shut and slid the bolt home with a violent motion. Her hands shook as she gripped the bolt. Both hands were covered in his blood, warm and bright against her skin. Through the cracked kitchen window, she watched him disappear into the dark woods at the edge of her property. The rain erased any trace of him almost immediately, the yard returning to gray emptiness. Helen stood alone in her kitchen, bleeding from a cut on her temple, breathing like she'd run a marathon. The metal box sat on the table, innocent and compact. The envelopes lay scattered across the oak surface. She had to move. The library basement was quiet at 4 p.m. on a rainy day. The microfilm reader hummed its patient electronic hum as Helen scrolled through 1994 missing persons reports. Her hand cranked the wheel rapidly, scanning past grainy photographs and desperate text. The flickering white light reflected in her glasses, catching the hollow look that had taken residence in her eyes. She stopped on a photograph of a 14-year-old girl. The child's face had a serious expression, as if she already knew too much. Around her neck, a heart-shaped locket. Helen pulled a photograph from the metal box. The same girl, same locket. The microfilm text below read, "Missing Sarah Thorne. Reported, March 15th, 1994. Helen's hand went very still. The library's main door chimed upstairs, heavy boots on the wooden floor. Multiple sets, the sound of a police radio crackling. Search the perimeter. Helen's body moved before her mind caught up. She was gathering the photographs, shoving them into her jacket, pulling the microfilm from the reader. Footsteps descended the stairs. 2 figures appeared at the top, silhouettes backlit by the main floor's light. Helen moved toward the basement window, the old-fashioned kind that opened onto the back alley. She pushed the heavy glass outward. Rain blew in horizontally. She climbed through awkwardly, the metal box still gripped to her chest, and dropped into the alley below. Her ankle twisted on landing, but the pain was distant, irrelevant. She was moving, running, her wet shoes slapping against wet pavement. Behind her, a radio crackled. She didn't look back. Her old Subaru screeched out of the library parking lot. The tires left smoke on the damp asphalt. In the rearview mirror, a Ford Interceptor exploded into life. Blue and red lights blinding her, the siren cutting through the rainy afternoon. Helen's hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel. She accelerated down Main Street, the Subaru's engine protesting the sudden demand. Behind her, the Interceptor matched her speed with the casual inevitability of something built for pursuit. The police cruiser rammed her rear bumper. Her car fishtailed toward a steep embankment. The world tilted. Helen yanked the wheel hard to the left, metal grinding against metal in a shower of sparks that looked like fireworks in the rain. The smell of burning rubber filled the car. She corrected, the front tires finding purchase on the road again, and accelerated harder. The Interceptor tried the same move. Helen slammed on the brakes. The heavier police cruiser overshot her position, its bumper crunching into the guardrail. Helen threw her car into reverse, tires churning up mud, and gunned it down a narrow logging road that opened to her left. The cruiser was too large, too heavy for the narrow track. She heard the sound of its engine struggling, then fading as she descended deeper into the forest. The Subaru's headlights carved tunnels through the rain-dark trees. Helen's chest heaved. Rain drummed on the roof. For the first time since finding the box, she allowed herself to breathe, but only for a moment. The abandoned pharmacy's back entrance had been unsealed for months. Just a matter of pushing through the rusted chain. Helen found the dark room on the basement level. A small tiled chamber with a red safety light that still impossibly worked. There was equipment here, chemical trays, developer and fixers still in their bottles, dried but usable if she could make them work. She had learned photography as a teenager, back when such skills seemed to matter. The red light cast everything in shades of crimson and shadow. Helen used tongs to agitate a piece of photo paper in a tray of developer. The liquid smelled acrid, chemical, but the emulsion still worked. A face began to emerge from the white paper, ghostly at first, then clearer. A young man, holding a crying toddler. The man had a distinctive tattoo on his right forearm, a serpent coiled in an ancient symbol. The same tattoo her brother Arthur had gotten at 22, right before he disappeared from her life entirely. Helen lifted the photo with trembling hands. The tongs clattered to the floor. She realized, looking at the background, at the town hall flag at half-mast, the funeral. The mayor's funeral, 20 years ago. Arthur had been part of this. Her brother, the one person she'd loved most completely, had been part of this machinery. Chemical solution dripped from the photo onto her clothes. She couldn't feel it. She couldn't feel anything except the systematic shutdown of her internal organs, as if her body was preparing for a catastrophic discovery it already knew was coming. She dropped the photo and sat on the floor of the darkroom, the red light making everything look like a wound. Town Hall stood silent at 11 o'clock at night. Helen had changed into dry clothes, changed her appearance, used back roads only locals knew existed. The office directory in the lobby showed the mayor's office on the 3rd floor. She climbed the stairs with the metal box pressed to her chest like a shield. Mayor Henderson was sitting behind his mahogany desk when she burst through the door, his hands flat on the surface, as if he'd been expecting her. As if this conversation had already been written into a script he'd memorized years ago. Helen's breath came in ragged bursts. "You have to help me. There's evidence. The mayor slowly rotated the green banker's lamp on his desk. Sheriff Thorne stepped out from the shadows behind the door, his hand resting on his holster. He locked the office door with a loud, final click that sounded like the closing of a trap. "We've been looking for that missing volume for a long time, Helen," the mayor said, his voice a low rasp. He opened a desk drawer and pulled out a matching metal box, placing it on the mahogany surface beside his coffee cup. Helen backed away. Your brother was smart enough to know when he was beaten," the sheriff said. "He made copies. We've been searching for 30 years. The 3 of them stood in a terrible triangle. Helen holding the evidence, the 2 men holding everything else, authority, institutional power, the weight of decades of silence. Helen threw the metal box. It sailed across the office and struck the glass trophy case behind the sheriff's head. The case exploded. Silver cups tumbled through shattered glass. The sheriff lunged. The struggle lasted perhaps 90 seconds, though it felt longer and shorter simultaneously. Adrenaline warped time. Helen swung a brass eagle paperweight. The sheriff's arm went into the glass. The mayor grabbed her throat from behind. She kicked over the banker's lamp, the bulb shattering, plunging the office into darkness and orange sparks. In the dark, Helen felt her body move with animal precision. She swung the metal box blindly and heard it connect with something soft. She scrambled toward the window and threw her body weight against the glass. It held. She threw again, and this time, something gave. Cold night air rushed in. Rain on her face. She was falling. She hit wet grass and rolled onto her shoulder. Behind her, Town Hall was a dark mass cut against the slightly less dark sky. Ahead of her lay the Winooski River, swollen and roaring with snowmelt and rain. Flashlight beams swept across the lawn, searching for her in the darkness. Helen pressed herself into the mud at the water's edge. The metal box had burst open on impact. Contents scattered across the wet grass. In the beam of a distant flashlight, she saw an envelope wedged in what looked like a false bottom. Her fingers found it. Shaking, she tore it open. A letter. Her brother's handwriting, preserved in fading ink. Helen, they threatened to kill you if I didn't drive the van. I'm so sorry. Inside the envelope, a small silver key with a plastic tag. Locker 42, Montpelier Station. The flashlight beams were drawing closer. Helen could hear voices now, coordinated and professional. They were searching the perimeter systematically. She had maybe 5 minutes before they reached her position at the river's edge. She moved. The storm drain entrance was hidden behind a stand of dying willows, a detail only someone who'd grown up in this town would know. Helen slipped into the concrete pipe, the metal box clanking against the walls as she crawled through darkness. Rushes of water threatened to knock her off balance. The pipe seemed to narrow as she moved deeper, until her shoulders brushed both walls simultaneously. Then, suddenly, the basement of the old post office. She emerged into darkness, her hands scrabbling for purchase on the slick concrete floor. An overhead light flickered on, motion activated, and illuminated a space frozen in time. Wooden sorting benches, vintage mailboxes, a uniformed locker standing against one wall. Inside the locker, a spare postal uniform, blue slacks, blue shirt with the USPS patch. Helen changed quickly, her wet clothes falling to the basement floor like shed skin. In a cracked mirror mounted on the wall, a woman she didn't recognize stared back at her. Wet hair, muddy face, wearing the uniform of the mail service. She wiped mud from her cheeks with a blue sleeve and waited for her heart to stop hammering against her ribs. It didn't, but she moved anyway. Montpelier Station at 2:30 in the morning was a cathedral of silence. The ticket counter stood unmanned. The waiting area was a landscape of empty plastic chairs. Helen's footsteps echoed on the polished floor as she moved toward the bank of lockers at the far end. Locker 42 was aluminum, a relic from the 70s. The key turned smoothly. Inside, a heavy ledger bound in black leather and a digital recorder. Helen's hands moved to retrieve them when a voice echoed through the station, amplified by the high ceiling and concrete walls. "Give it to me, Helen, for Arthur's sake." Sheriff Thorne emerged from the shadows by the ticket counter. He was still wearing his uniform, his badge catching the fluorescent light. His service pistol was already drawn. Helen's body didn't waste time on fear. It moved directly to calculation. A heavy bag of mail sat on a nearby cart. Helen grabbed it and hurled it at the sheriff's head. He dipped, and she dove behind the industrial mail-sorting conveyor belt that dominated the center of the room. Her hand found the red power button. The machine groaned to life. Gears engaged. A massive motor began its mechanical labor. The conveyor belt shuddered and started moving, a heavy rubber surface bearing down on metal rollers. Clack, clack, clack. The rhythm of a machine designed to sort packages, to organize chaos into order. The sheriff vaulted the belt. Helen grabbed his ankle. He fell onto the moving track. A mechanical arm, an automated sorter arm, all hydraulics and brutal efficiency, descended. The arm slammed down on his arm, pinning it against the steel rail with an audible snap of bone. The sheriff screamed. Helen stood over him, holding the digital recorder. She pressed play. Her brother's voice filled the station, thin and ghostly from the speaker. Thorne's office, the mayor present, the councilman recording everything for his insurance policy. They said if I didn't drive, they'd kill Helen. They said if I talked, they'd make sure I disappeared. The sheriff's face went pale. He stopped fighting the machine, stopped struggling, just lay there pinned and broken, as Arthur's recorded confession methodically cataloged every name, every transaction, every sin. Helen turned up the volume. The post office steps were warm in the clear morning light. State police cruisers lined the street in a careful formation. The mayor and sheriff were let out in handcuffs, hollow-eyed, diminished by the simple act of daylight, and placed into separate vehicles. The machinery of justice was slow, but it moved. Helen sat on the stone steps, a thermal blanket over her shoulders, holding a cup of coffee that someone had provided. She didn't remember who. A young man approached her slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might startle her. He was approximately 20 years old. He wore a heart-shaped locket around his wrist like a bracelet. He handed her a postcard, wrinkled, aged, never sent. Helen's hands took it without her brain's permission. The address was written in careful script. Helen Morse, Rural Route 3, Waterbury, Vermont. The message was brief. Arthur didn't run away. He stayed to watch over you from the shadows. I was the one he trusted to keep the proof. Arthur's son. Helen looked up from the card. The young man was smiling sadly. She understood then that her brother had lived, that he'd built a life in the margins, that the neighbors she barely knew had actually been him, watching the road, guarding the evidence, waiting for the moment someone strong enough might arrive to use it. She looked back down at the postcard. The words blurred.